Hello and welcome to today's episode of Get Into Flow. I am joined by Marcelle Rose, all the way from the UK, across the pond. She is here to talk about her expertise and more specifically when it comes to eating disorders. I know it's a sensitive subject. I have a personal experience and journey with eating disorders. I have people around me who have suffered from eating disorders, so I'm very curious to hear Marcelle's point of view to see how we can use mindset and how we can use these amazing tools that we have now to help us regulate through these kind of eating disorders. So help me welcome Marcelle Rose. Hello.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So thrilled that you're here. Let's start by telling everyone a little bit more about you and your journey.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a bank registered nutritionist. It's over in the UK, from North London. And I specialize in disordered eating, emotional eating, and eating disorders. So I work with primarily women who are struggling with their relationship with food. They might be binge eating, bulimia, and restrictive eating behaviors, and really working in a kind of very holistic way, not just on the nutrition side of things, but very much the mindset side, the eating psychology, understanding the emotions and what's playing a role, because it's not just about the food. So we really have to dig deep and understand what's going on.
Yeah, these are tools I wish I had when I was a teenager. And I don't talk about this much. So for those listening, it might be the first time that you're hearing it. If you're part of my family, it might also be the first time that you're hearing it because I haven't revealed this part of myself. But as a teenager, I did suffer from, I would say, disordered eating. I didn't have an eating disorder, but I was definitely caught up in body dysmorphia,
Mm,
not seeing myself for what I truly was and always thinking that I had to regulate or control my food. But I love, Marcel, that you say it's not just about the nutrition and the food, right?
mm,
Because if you're, though, it's just the way that I explained it, I had to regulate and control. So that means that there was part of me that felt that I needed to do something, and that all stemmed from my thoughts. So it wasn't
mm,
just what I was putting in my body, but like there was so much more behind it that had I had these tools as a teenager, I feel like I would have moved through it with much more grace and much more ease. It wouldn't have lasted as long because the body dysmorphia, I would say, lasted up until just a few years ago when I started doing this healing
oh,
work and this
yeah.
emotional work. So maybe let's dig deep a little bit and see for you, like, what are your experiences with how powerful this mindset work can be for people who struggle with disordered eating or even just like that body dysmorphia or not seeing ourselves for what we truly are.
Yeah, I mean it's so connected, isn't it? Because you've got there's lots of different reasons why someone might end up trying to, control things around food or feel completely out of control around food. Um, but it's so tied with body image, and we see this starting from a young age with lots of people. So many of my clients tell me that perhaps there were comments made about them as a child, or they were told to go to a weight loss group or taken to a weight loss group, comments made by family. I mean, very often parental, their parents' relationship with food wasn't good. So, and as a child, they've absorbed all of this up, um, to decide that actually their worth is so tied up in their appearance, and that's carried them throughout life. So it's almost they built on this, and then of course that's like the initial layer, and then these continuous layers are just building up of beliefs and thoughts as you go through life, and all the things that our poor younger generation have to battle with now with social media, obviously making it even harder, um, and media in general. And I think actually now we've taken a big step back, but that's not, another direction to go in, because with the whole weight loss drugs, I think the sort of body image and the narrative around weight loss has got worse again, when I thought we were kind of making a little bit of progress. So I sort of see it as, you've kind of, for some reason, the disordered eating behavior or the eating disorder was there. It was there for a reason, and it developed, and it was almost like in the brain. You sort of think of it like a computer program that's running in the back of your brain, and all this information's going in. But over time, you realize that actually these thoughts, these beliefs, and the behaviors are not serving you anymore. But the computer program isn't actually changing, and you're still stuck with all of that. So that's where a lot of the work is, to start unraveling all of that around the mindset.
Very interesting. And it does go far back, because if I think of like 90s babies, 80s and 90s babies, which we are, um, we had modeled behavior from our parents, as you mentioned, and our parents' relationship with their bodies and with food. We saw unconsciously what was happening there, and then we developed an opinion about ourselves, or a way of acting or seeing our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be more specific. And I actually had this conversation with my mom the other day, mentioning to her, like, I remember you looking in the mirror when I was younger and getting dressed for an occasion and complaining that things didn't fit right, or complaining at how you looked. And she mentioned, like, oh my goodness, I was so careful. I thought I was so careful to not show you that, or to not, have my insecurities be passed down to you. But this just goes to show how sensitive it is, and how, as children, we're absorbing everything and we see everything, whether or not we realize it. And so when I grew up, I was like, oh, well, if I look in the mirror, I have to find flaws, because that's what I was shown. And then you
Absolutely.
grow up with that. And then on top of it, kids now, like you mentioned, with social media and comparison. And in our time, it was Photoshop, in
Yeah.
terms of like making images unrealistic. And now there's AI. So
Mm.
we have all of these unrealistic uh, goals and images that are shown to us on a regular basis. It's definitely taking a toll. So I think even more we need to have that awareness around the mindset of like being able to decipher like what is real, what is fake, what is attainable, what is not. And
Mm.
I think, like you mentioned, that mindset work, it's so important. Can we maybe see what is one thing that someone who has that awareness and is ready to start doing the work to help themselves break those patterns, or, like kind of reprogram that computer that you were speaking of? What is one thing they can do to start with?
Yeah, so I'd say the very first thing they can do is to actually become aware of all those thoughts, because when I speak to clients, they're often we reflect on quite a lot together. They reflect. And one of the things they find is, I had no idea I was actually speaking to myself in that way. A lot of the time, some of the thoughts they are conscious of. But when you dig a bit deeper and recognize a lot of them, they're like, oh, okay, gosh, that's really interesting. So I think the first thing is actually becoming aware of the thoughts, because without being aware of them, you can't do anything about them. So and the way of doing that is actually writing it down can be really helpful. So almost having a journal that you can write down when you notice, it's catching yourself when you notice you're having an unhelpful thought, whether it be about your body, about yourself, about your ability to do things, about food. Write it down, but write it down in that, I always like to say, write it down saying, I noticed that I was thinking. Because if you start it with that, you are identifying that it's just a thought and it's not a fact. And that's really important, because thoughts are not facts, though we can very strongly believe them as facts. And they can be seriously destructive and harmful. So if you write down, I noticed that I was thinking that I don't know, when I looked in the mirror, I just looked horrible or whatever, or I look really big, or my clothes look awful on me, whatever it is, and write that down. And then you can start to work on reframing that thought. And with reframing, it's really about writing something that would be more helpful down. So, and this is something that it takes time. I work with my clients over it, and it takes time to develop. It's practice, but it's not about saying something completely the opposite that's really positive and that you would never believe. It's just about slightly shifting your perception of the situation. So, if you are not, for example, if you're looking in the mirror and you're seeing something you don't like, it's about maybe saying, I'm okay, and, or, but actually, I really like, this is fine. I really actually like how my hair looks today. That's okay. Or taking it away from the appearance altogether, that, my body's the least interesting thing about me. That might take time to get to, because I think for that it's quite hard for some people to believe, but it's just a shift. And for example, with food or eating behavior, a lot of my clients who struggle with binge eating, when they've identified what's gone on, and what they might do is have really guilty thoughts following a binge. And, so I've blown it, I've ruined it, I've failed, all of that stuff. Instead of, so write down, I noticed that I'm thinking that I failed, and then reframe it. This is a learning experience. It literally can be something like that, because it is a learning experience. Actually, oh, what can I understand about that? How can I be curious and understand what led to that? So it's the simple reframing
I love that.
practice, but finding some key things, because very often there's the same unhelpful thoughts that you churn out over and over again. So it's really identifying those and actually, writing down some answers that you can challenge those with and reframe.
Mhm. Yeah, very helpful. It all starts with awareness. And I love that you say, we are not our thoughts. And we often get
Mm,
tied to our thoughts, and our identity becomes what we're thinking. So that's a great exercise. Write down your thoughts, create some distance between you and the thoughts. And then I love how you describe the reframing, because we often think, oh, we have to go flip opposite to the positive
yes.
of the negative, but you're so right. We don't believe that. So it will never stick. If we don't believe it and you can fake it till you make it, I don't believe in that. So you
Yeah.
can say it as many times, but if there's part of you that doesn't believe it, it's never going to have the impact that you're looking for it to have.
Yes.
So I love
Exactly.
that you kind of brought that point in, because a lot of us and a lot of my clients too, when I ask them to reframe something, it's difficult because they've been
Mm,
thinking this thought, this negative thought that's no longer serving them for so long that they don't even know how else they can see or view this through that different lens.
yes. Yeah. So it does take time, doesn't it, to build on that.
Yeah.
Um, but the practice, I think, really helps. And what I see with clients really going, really being actually very proud of themselves, and we begin to develop these, oh, I noticed I had a win there because I was able to reframe that. And that was able to move them out of behaviors that could have been destructive afterwards.
Hmm.
Because the body image thoughts, for example, can really lead to a binge or restriction or something, purging, anything like that. So if we can move them away from that via just shifting their thoughts a bit, then that can help them break that cycle.
Absolutely. And so when we talk about the thoughts are related or tied to body image or maybe self-worth. And then when you speak about the binge eating, that's the behavior or the pattern that's a result of that thought. Is that
Yeah,
how it happens? Yeah.
yeah, that's what we see. We tend to see that if we view it in that kind of cycle, that habit cycle, we'll see some kind of cue or trigger that led to that. And that could be anything. I mean, it could be a sort of time of day, an environmental thing, where they are passing a particular bakery or something like that. Or it could be a really difficult conversation or a stress at work, or it could be a body image situation. So something like catching themselves in the mirror, seeing a photograph of themselves, having to go to a party where they feel uncomfortable, trying on a pair of jeans that feel tight, anything. And then that leads to that sort of routine. What would they routinely do? Now, if they struggle with binge eating, or call themselves an emotional eater, then it might be turning to food at that point. But what's happened is that the thoughts have this catastrophic thinking have then led to that behavior. And then, of course, the thoughts that follow again can keep the cycle going, because then there's that guilt and shame, and then leads to the behavior again.
So it is that vicious cycle that just
Yeah.
starts over and over. I'd love to talk about emotional eating.
Mm.
How would you describe it? We could start there, and then how does one start to work through it?
Yeah. So I would say that, first of all, and I talk about emotional eating, and certainly it's something I talked about in my book as well, that is on binge eating, because I want to explain that a lot of people kind of label themselves an emotional eater, but I think most of us do emotionally eat, and that's fine. It's just a normal sort of behavior as a human being. But I think it's when it becomes turning to food becomes our only coping mechanism, and it becomes distressing. And in a way, binge eating is a form of emotional eating, but quite specific. Whereas I know emotional eating is more of a kind of umbrella term for that. Really, if it becomes something that is the only way they're coping, it becomes distressing and it becomes harmful to them, then that's when it's problematic. So it is that, turning to food for dealing with things like distress, anxiety, loneliness, boredom, overwhelm, all of those kind of things. I mean, of course, emotional eating can be at happy occasions as well, but people tend to not be so distressed at those points. It's usually the other things that cause the problems. And binge eating specifically is really more about eating a large amount of food in a small space of time, very, very quickly, and feeling completely and utterly out of control. So it's almost trance-like for those people. So it is a bit different in a way. I think some people who describe themselves as an emotional eater feel like perhaps they struggle with cravings, or they're grazing all day and they feel a bit out of control. But when someone's in a proper binge, it's really trance-like and completely out of control, and it's very distressing afterwards, and often they're very secretive around it as well.
So the behaviors vary, but at the core, there's a trigger. There's
Yeah.
something that kind of starts that cycle. Um, and with that kind of behavior, would you go as far as to say that food can become an addiction for eating?
I think it can feel very addictive. I think it's like addictive like behaviors. There's a lot of, disagreement, I suppose, amongst experts as if you could become a food addict. Is it a real addiction? And I tend to be in the mindset that it feels very addictive and it is addictive like behavior, but we can't treat it the same way as you would with somebody with an alcohol or drug addiction, because you have to have food in your life.
True.
And, you know, from experience and certainly from research, etc., and from working with people, you can't try and just remove specific foods, for the long term, because it just doesn't work. If you're trying to eliminate whole food groups or whole foods or whatever from the diet, it's likely to not be long lasting in terms of, and it sort of increases the power of that food over you in a way, because the cravings become more eventually, and people feel like they've fallen off the wagon.
Mhm.
And it just doesn't work that way. I know there's some programs that try and deal with binge eating that way, but just from people I've seen, clients who've come through those programs and then come to me and said it worked and then it didn't, because eventually it just wasn't sustainable.
Like diets in general,
Yeah,
right? When you try to
exactly.
diet, it works for a short amount of time, but it's definitely not sustainable because it is eliminating food groups, or it's like drastically changing your eating behavior or your relationship with food.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
Speaking of relationship with food, how can we start to cultivate a healthy relationship with food? Because from what I'm hearing and from my personal experience, that is a big part of it as well. It's like, how do we view food?
Mhm.
If we grew up in a household where everyone was watching what they ate, the diet culture was real back then. So it was all about carbs are
Mhm.
bad, or like this food group is now bad. Like there was so many conflicting ideas and opinions. And even now, like so many experts have different opinions on what you should eat and what you shouldn't eat and what's good and what's not. So there's definitely a lot of conflicting views and a lot of confusion. But I think what I want to unpack with you is more, how do we establish a healthy relationship with food and with eating?
Yeah, yeah. No, it's a great question. I think it's more about one of the things that I work on with my clients is about adding in. So we're not removing, we're adding in, and creating a varied, balanced way of eating. And what I'd say is that for many people, they've always thought I should be eliminating, I shouldn't be eating that. So there's this mindset around good and bad foods, and we really want to try and shift our thinking around foods to the neutral. Food is food. Yes, there's some things that are going to be more helpful, but not necessarily. Some things are more helpful because they're giving the key nutrients to help us feel better, and they're more helpful because they might help balance and regulate our blood glucose. So we're going to have less cravings. But sometimes food is helpful because it's the thing we've got available and we need to eat, and it's quick and easy to prepare. So it's being helpful in that way. Um, and sometimes it's just giving us joy, and that's okay too. So it's about bringing the balance back into things. So, all foods fit, but it's about, okay, you can work on adding in to help you feel satisfied and satiated, to regulate your blood glucose, to give your body the nutrients that it needs, so it's not searching for other things and creating cravings around that, and giving yourself enough food as well. Because we know, as you mentioned with the diet, we know with diets and restriction, one of the things your body is going to do is, firstly, it will actually try and slow down your metabolism to hold on to energy, but it will also raise your appetite hormones, so your hunger hormones, and that's what leads to the cravings. So you're kind of working against your body. So really, there's a lot around the good and bad foods that we have. I mean, people think about foods as good and bad, or I've been good and bad because of what I've eaten. So we really want to try and move away from that dichotomous thinking around food, and just say, that's okay, we had this, but I've also had this, and that, and start to build up instead of stripping out, really.
Ugh, I love that. Thank you for saying that, because the good versus bad, hearing it in that way just drives it home for me. It's so true that there are
Mm,
good and bad foods, and then we feel guilty if we eat the bad foods, so then we're bad, or we're
yeah.
trying to be good, and so we eat only the good foods. Like, oh my goodness, yeah, that needs to stop.
Yeah.
And that's definitely all mindset.
Mm, yeah, completely. Because
Hmm.
we've, you know, when we're born, we just we just give them food. We decide what we want, and we decide when we're full, and we know we don't want any more. You see babies, you know they know when they don't. But actually, the layers start building on from there, from what we're picking up, from what other people are saying. It's quite incredible when you think about it.
A lot of undoing
Yes.
bad behaviors. Now I just labeled it bad, but but the behaviors that no longer serve us in that sense of the things we
Yeah.
picked up along the way. Yes, family, friends, society, like so many things that we've learned or we've taken on, we've been
Mm,
conditioned to believe through media as well. So much of it stems in what we're influenced by. And I
yeah.
think, unpacking that, and I love the work that you're doing because you're getting to the root, like you're removing all those layers and saying,
Mm,
like, okay, at the root of it, what is that trigger or what is that that's causing you to have this kind of dysregulated pattern of eating? And then how can
mm,
we change your behavior with that initial thought that sets you off to want to eat more or to binge or to not eat or to eat
mm.
only certain foods, right? Goodness. So it sounds like a hectic, chaotic process, only because there must be a lot of back and forth. And like you mentioned, it takes time, especially when it comes to our thoughts, to start reprogramming. What
Yes.
is the time frame that you would suggest just for people to manage expectations? Like, let's say they want to get into working with you. What
Mm,
is the package or the offer that you mention off the bat so that they have an idea like this is not going to happen overnight. It's not going to be
yeah.
fixed in 2 weeks. It's going to take at least a few months. But
Mm.
what would you suggest?
Well, most of the people I work with, and especially if we're working with eating disorders, as opposed to what someone might say, relationship with food, but perhaps emotional eating, history of dieting. Most people that I work with for a minimum of 6 months.
Hmm.
So, there is a commitment there. And it can be
Absolutely.
quite scary for people to
Yeah.
think, right, and this is different to what I've done before. But as we know, they've kept doing the same thing over and over again, and it's not working for them. So it takes time. Some people, I do sometimes work with people for 3 months, but it's quite intensive work, whether it's 3 months or 6 months. It's starts off with at least 3 months of weekly sessions because those weekly check-ins are so important to really, get to grips and reflect and bring in different strategies and tools and understand what's going on. Because obviously, if you leave big gaps, the guilt might set in if something hasn't gone exactly to plan, and then you're sort of in a bit of a downward spiral. Whereas actually, this way, it's much more motivating because we're actually highlighting the wins as well as the challenges and working on the challenges and working through and really looking at the whole process without the judgment. That's one of the other things that's so key is just being that curious observer and not judging. It's like, that's really interesting. I wonder why that happened. Could it be because of X, Y, and Z? Okay, what can I do differently next time? So it's a lot of that. But as you said, it is the process isn't linear. It's very much, it's a bit up and down. There's the general direction of upwards, but it's a bit up and down, and that's to be expected.
Absolutely.
Part
Like
of the
any,
learning.
yeah,
Yeah.
like any work in personal development, any growth, any change that you're looking for is definitely going to have like, yes, we're going up, but in a loopy kind of way, in
Yes,
an up and down
exactly.
kind of way. Yes. But if you're ready, if you recognize yourself in what we've been talking about and you're ready to change, just know that like any change, you need to put in the work. And if
Yes.
you're committed to it, set your eye on the goal. Like get focused on what is the result that this will bring me. And it's
Mm,
really to help you heal your relationship with food and to have a better relationship and to be able to not spiral into those patterns that are no longer serving you. So in this case, I know it might sound overwhelming to someone who's like, well, that's a lot of work to put in to just change my eating patterns, but there's such a bigger goal and a bigger end result and a feeling of inner peace
Mm.
and celebrating yourself for being able to do this and feeling proud and feeling like you can really make a difference in your own life and to not have to worry anymore about what you eat, how much you eat, what you look like, what someone else is saying about you when it comes to your appearance. Like there's so many benefits and positive attributes, but you need to put in the work.
Yes, I
Yeah.
100% agree. But when you do, and as you say, how it can transform your life is incredible because suddenly you have room in your life and in your head for things that you want to do and things that you want to think about and your purpose and your passions, and that sense of freedom. So it's incredible.
Yeah, just feeling free. I mean, that in itself is worth it. Absolutely.
Mm.
Yes. So tell us, Marcel, how can we work with you? You also have a book that has
Yeah.
been published. Tell us all about that.
Yes. So it's called the Binge Freedom Method, and it is to help people overcome binge eating and emotional eating. Um, and it's broken it down into four essential pillars, which are nourish, balance, think, and feel. So the think is the mindset that we've been talking a little bit about. The nourish is more around the nutritional wisdom and how you can gradually, step by step, do some of that building back in. And then balance is more about understanding the different things that can impact things like your eating behavior, your cravings, your hunger, your appetite, all of those things that people never really talk about. So your circadian rhythm, your hormones, your neurotransmitters, that your brain chemicals, and your gut microbiome as well, all of those things. So the idea is that it's all action steps the whole way through so that you are actively doing something. Because as you said, you need to do the work. So you can learn lots about it. And obviously the learning bit is really useful because I think it's really empowering because you realize, oh, it's not about me failing. It's about these are some of the reasons why what's going on. But also the action steps are really important to actually move you forward. So I've included them in that, like a downloadable workbook with that, so that to help you reflect and work on those different things as well.
That's amazing. I can't wait to get my hands on it. I'm super curious. So I'll drop a link in the show notes so that you can all access. And if you have anything else to help with some tools or even just access to you, I'll drop that in the
Yeah,
show notes too.
yeah. I've got something that can be really helpful, that can help with appetite actually, particularly, but also of like your key first steps to
Amazing.
essentially changing a relationship with food. So
Wonderful. Well, thank you for being here, for sharing so much information, so many useful tips. Again, all of the contact information for Marcel will be in the show notes. And I'd love for you to leave us with some final words, something that you'd like everyone to remember and to take away from this conversation.
um, I think I would say that it can feel really overwhelming. It can feel like you probably, if you're struggling with this, you feel like you'll never be able to overcome it because and it's taken over your life and your mind. But actually, there is a way. There is a way. Um, and as you said, you've just got to be prepared to commit to the process, to do the work, and have that self-compassion. I think one of the things I haven't really mentioned is that, and that's a big part of it. And you can be free of this, if that's something you're struggling with.
Yeah, and thank you for doing this work, for facilitating, for, just being a source for those who want to feel better about their relationship with food and to change their patterns. Just thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you.
And thanks for being here. Wonderful.
Thanks for having me.